Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 118 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at CUIs, the leading talent development provider to the credit union industry and a longtime partner of ours here at CUInsight.com. So after listening to this episode, head on over and check out the CUIs podcast on CUmanagement.com. It is great content from thought leaders inside and outside of credit unions, and I will tell you, it is one that you will not want to miss. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUinsight.com, and I'm lucky enough to have conversations with the amazing people who make credit unions great, and I get to bring them to you. I pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Todd Marksberry. Todd is the president and CEO of Canvas Credit Union in Colorado. Todd's also a fellow podcaster, so we talked a little bit about that and how his podcast, In the Room with Todd Marksberry, how it benefits Canvas and their community, from the guests that he has on his show. So you want to make sure to check his out too. The link's in the show notes. We talked about his career path to the CEO chair, his vision for the future of Canvas and the credit union system overall. We talked a lot about leadership and what it means to be a good leader and the way he leads and why culture is so important at his credit union. And of course, we wrapped it all up with the rapid fire questions, having a little fun there. So I really did enjoy this conversation. I look forward to continuing it down the road when I get to be a guest on his show, In the Room. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Todd Marksberry. Enjoy. Todd, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Randy. Appreciate it.
I've been excited to talk to you because a fellow podcaster, In the Room with Todd Marksberry is your podcast. I know we could geek out on that. I'm sure if we were going to conferences, it's probably something we would have already done. We won't try to bore everybody with a bunch of podcast talk, but I did want to start there.
Well, thank you. My feelings were a little hurt. I'm like, hey, come on. Why can't I get on the most prestigious podcast in the business?
Well, I'm looking forward to being on yours this fall, too. So I feel the same. So I wanted to ask you, though, just to start with the podcast, what was the motivation behind setting up In the Room?
Yeah, that's a great question. So probably almost 2 years ago, Randy, Tansley Stearns, as you know, is with us. And she came and she had this idea. And at the time, we were about a year into the rebranding of Canvas Credit Union. We were public service credit union for 78 years, and we had rebranded to Canvas, and we were trying a lot of different things to raise the awareness of who we were as Canvas, and also being very, very involved in the community. So she had this idea, the term thought leader, and we wanted to position ourselves as a thought leader for a lot of different reasons. Certainly not so people would, come and open up checking accounts with us, but, we felt like we had a lot of really, really bright, gifted people here who had a lot to say and could share with the community. And so she said, well, what about you? Let's do this podcast. And we started, Randy, funny enough, the concept, when we named it In the Room, it was about from the Broadway musical Hamilton. And it was this concept of, these young aspiring leaders. I remember the days when I was like, I wonder what's going on in my CEO's office with the door closed. What are they talking about? And as she said, to try to demystify what's happening in the room, but have conversations with all these leaders and have them share their stories so that people sort of they're sitting in the room and hear. So does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. I love that. The one thing I would throw out there to people, if they haven't listened yet, our listeners are primarily credit union folks, but you actually interview business leaders from around the community as well. You kind of have a mixture of both. So that's something I've really enjoyed as a small business owner, like hearing from other business owners on your show. So
interestingly, that was another idea the team had. We started off with folks like yourself and you CEOs of credit unions and CEOs of credit union organizations. And then during COVID, the team had this idea, let's pivot a little bit. How about we add every other podcast, a business owner or an entrepreneur, or we had a musical artist on just a couple of weeks ago, but those folks had really interesting stories to tell. And the cool thing is we've cross-pollinated. We've had credit union folks who are sitting and learning from entrepreneurs. And then we've had these business owners, entrepreneurs, really gifted, creative people learning about credit unions, which is kind of cool. We're pouring the Kool-Aid, my friend. Yeah,
absolutely. I love it. You mentioned the rebrand. When you launched the podcast, you're already a year in. You've done a ton of work, you and your team, at transforming Canvas over the last few years. Could you give our listeners a little background in, the work that you've done since you came on as CEO?
Sure. As it relates to the rebrand, I'll give you a little bit of context. So in June of this year, I was hired 6 years ago. So June of 2015, I came in. We were a public service credit union, as I mentioned. Really, I was following in the footsteps of Dave Moss, who was the CEO for 37 years. You probably remember him as a fixture there at GAC and around our industry. But I was coming in, and we had a lot of work to do, to be honest. He had built an incredible foundation. We had great people, but it was about, casting this vision for the organization and building strategy and really hiring some incredibly talented and gifted people, as well as looking within, most importantly, and lifting some folks up. And as we were working on a bunch of things at culture, and we changed our online banking and our mobile and, our mortgage loan origination system and consumer loan origination system, we were doing all these things. And then when we were finally beginning to pick up a little bit of momentum, I had this feeling that public service credit union in our brand, at least how we had positioned ourselves for a lot of years, that it was going to be a little bit of an impediment, in particular with younger folks here in Colorado. And so we worked with an outside branding company and did some focus groups and things like that. And sure enough, they came back and said, yeah, I remember this. One of the people said, yeah, that sounds like public service credit union. Is that something I think my parents would be a part of? It's like the kiss of death. You're like, is it a government agency?
That's exactly what I would have thought. If you're coming in without knowing credit unions, I would be like, oh, you probably have to work for the public service in some way. So,
that's right.
There's a question when you were talking about that. You came in, you followed a leader who had a large legacy, right, in our industry. A lot of people that listen to this show are either, I hear a lot from new CEOs, and I hear a lot from people that are hoping to become CEOs, that they enjoy these conversations. If you don't mind me asking, if you could kind of throw it back to 6 years ago, was getting the board to buy into your vision of change after, kind of having a single leader for 30 some years, I think you said, was that a tough thing, or is that one of the reasons they picked you and tapped you on the shoulder?
I think it was one of the reasons, Randy, that they tapped me on the shoulder that, I was coming from Delta Community Credit Union. When I left there, we were about $4.8 billion in assets, and I had been there 16 years, and we had done a lot of things as far as technology, and we had a rebranding as well, and we worked on culture and things. But I think that they were anxious. Dave did a lot of great things. He really did. He was a pioneer in our industry for decades, but I think that they had a sense that there was much more for the organization. And a lot of that had to probably do with not just technology that we needed to change, but culture in particular. And I remember when I was interviewing with them, in the very last interview, I was just about to turn 50 years old. And I had been in the industry for 22 years. And it was just one of those things where I said, hey, what you see is what you get. I'm a little bit nutty. I'm a little bit unconventional. But I have a heart. I love this industry. I think we can be better. I think we can get past 7% market share. And I said, I think we can do it with people. I think we can win with people. We want to be known for our people, meaning, we have checking accounts, mortgages, and things like that. Those are table stakes, gang. I said, I really do believe that we need to talk about love and family and trust and heart and things like that. And let's go find some people. I always say this land of misfit toys, right? Let's go find these unique people who have a heart for serving others, and it's not about self. And man, let's go and tell them about checking accounts and car loan. Let's help them afford life. And I think the credit union, that board of directors, and I told them, I said, hey, if that doesn't resonate with you, please don't hire me because we'll be a bad fit. But if it does, let's go. Let's go do some fun things. And I'm very blessed. We saw things right out of the gate. They were like, go run. Let's go win with people.
You mentioned people. I assume that's for on all your social media and things like that. It's Canvas family.
Yes. Some of that language, Randy, started when I was back at Delta. I didn't have the ability. I wasn't the CEO, so I didn't have necessarily the ability to, I won't say force, but to implement language all the way to, culture to the point where there's a certain language. I think we talked about those kind of things behind closed doors in the room.
Right.
But when I got here, I told all of our folks, I said, hey, listen, this has got to be a family environment. I said, you have to care very, very deeply about serving our members, but you really need to care even more deeply about serving one another, our team or our family. And I just began to say family, family, family. And it's really taken hold here in our culture.
That's very cool. So you're 6 years in. What has you most excited over the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Oh, I think the opportunity Randy, we have this thing, and if you've ever looked at what we have on social, we talk about helping you afford life. What excites me is this. We have 265,000 members here in Colorado, out around the country, but here primarily in Colorado. There are about 6 million people here in Colorado. That excites me. The prospect of helping more people afford life here in Colorado and beyond, for that matter. What really excites me as well, we're looking at the prospect. We're here on the Front Range. So from Fort Collins to Castle Rock, which is a little bit north of Colorado Springs. But I have learned in the past 6 years more about those rural communities over on the western slopes that really don't have opportunity in terms of credit unions like Canvas to serve their communities. That excites me, man, to get a chance to go over there and help those people, partner with them and make investments in those communities in ways that matter. That really excites me.
Watching you grow, and I will say, like, I had heard of and seen what you were doing from afar, but you mentioned Tansley earlier. When you brought her on board, I've known her for years, so it was also exciting to just kind of see everything you have going on. So I know there's a ton we could talk about on that. I'd like to switch gears a bit. This is something I've been thinking about a lot this year, and after the year and a half that we all went through, or that we're still kind of in the midst of, it really felt like when I was talking to leaders, I can even say it personally, that we were putting out fires. There were a lot more fires. But to be a good CEO, to talk about 3 to 5 years from now and what excites you, you have to find that time in the space to think strategically. I don't think you'd be where you are without that. So any hacks for our listeners or thoughts on how do you make the time to, sure, you have to put out the fires, but still keep that strategic mindset of looking forward?
For me, it really always comes down to, Randy, just having balance in your life. And I don't know if I would use the term, I've never been one to use the term work-life balance because I have no balance as it relates to my work. I'm always thinking about work, but within the context of life, right? Very much from a social perspective, have always, way back in the day, years ago, just I was very close with the folks who I was working, standing shoulder to shoulder with at Delta, the same as here. We became very close friends. We spent time with one another in the office, but as well as outside of the office. And it just meant that you're always sort of talking about your life, but also looking forward and how you can improve people's lives, and which means improve our members' lives and improve the lives of our Canvas family, right? And so for me, it's like that combination. I'm thinking about when I'm sitting this past week, and I've moved out here. I'm kind of a ranch guy now. I have a John Deere zero turn and have 39 acres. But this weekend, I probably mowed maybe 8 acres. And I just sit out there with my headphones on and my hat, and I'm just kind of dreaming about what the possibilities are. So that provides some balance to me. I'm enjoying that. I run all the time. Similarly, it just gives me a time to kind of chill out, but also think about, my day and the week and what's coming down the pike. And if that makes sense, that's
absolutely
the way I approach that.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. You mentioned something about being, tight with your team, and that's where a lot of your friends have come from. And in the past, I've been the same way. Those people that you work around, they tend to become very good friends. Did that change at all when you became the CEO? There's that idea that sometimes the CEO is the loneliest chair in the building, right? Like between the board and before the rest of the team.
That's a great question. I think it did change, but I think it changed for the better, meaning I'm probably closer with the folks who I'm working alongside now as the CEO than before. And we were always close, but at Delta, I have some folks who worked with me, reported to me, and we became good friends. We're still good friends to this day. Jay Gratwick, who's the CFO there, the guy named Bill Mesplay, who was the CIO, Jason Osterhage, who you probably know, who was the CLO at Alliant, Mike London at Georgia United Credit. There are a lot of folks. We became good friends, but I think that, I was still lacking a lot of maturity in terms of what that meant and where's the balance in that regard. I think there's far more balance now. We're a little bit older. We all have lives and things like that. We are very, very close. I think it's extremely important that you get to know your folks. I think it's hard to inspire hearts and minds if you can't show that you really love them and you care about them. Another CEO friend of mine who's a wonderfully successful CEO made this comment and said, hey, we can be friends, but we can't be friendly, as it related to their executive team. And I could never figure that out. I'm like, but I couldn't knock it because that person's extremely successful. But I don't know if I don't want to journey with folks. I want to be friends and kind of share life with one another. I think it just makes the journey all the better.
I was excited to ask you this question because I knew you had outside activities as well. But this idea of staying purpose-driven, it's not tough to find purpose in credit unions. But a lot of the times when we're really trying to grow and things like that, we can kind of veer off purpose a little bit and then, bringing ourselves back. So, that question of like, how do you make sure with all the growth that you have going on around you that you're staying true to your purpose in that vision that you have and how that relates to both professionally and personally?
I actually attribute it to the unique relationship and bond that we have as an executive team. We dream together, right? And we've shared life together. And I know about their kids and what their kids are involved in and things like that. That's just a part of it. But I think because I've shared what I believe our core values should be, what our purpose should be. It's not Todd's purpose, Todd's core values. It's purpose and core values that we've developed together, and it's evolved over time. And I think because of the relationship that we have with one another, we keep each other in check, right? You have those moments in time where, as a CEO, it could be a little bit lonely. I think that if I had this like line of demarcation, we can be friendly, but we can't be friends. I think it would be hard for them to speak into, hey, Marksberry, you're drifting a little bit in terms of our purpose. Because we are a very, very tight-knit group of folks, we do keep one another on sort of in the guardrails, if you will, if there is a little bit of drift.
This just popped into my head, so I apologize if this is going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I've heard often, back when we used to go to conferences, the idea that if someone was unhappy, maybe they're in senior management, it was because they weren't feeling heard or they weren't feeling like it wasn't, I don't want to say a safe space, but you couldn't express your ideas or you couldn't push back against the leader. How have you created that space so that your senior management team knows that they can go, hey, Todd, let's bring it back?
I think they know pretty well. They can call me what's the proverbial bullcrap card. I think people call it something different, but they know me extremely well. They know that I care very deeply about and love our folks. And I made this comment to our board, another thing on that very last interview. I said, hey, I'm in the last season of my career, in the last season of play. I want to build something unique and special with people I care about and love. And again, that sounds really kind of weird, but I truly believe that our leadership team, our executive team knows I mean that with everything that I am. And so in that vein, they know, hey, listen, Todd doesn't care if we come in. Our CFO, Colleen, is like, I always use her as an example. She's a tough Wyoming gal and just brilliant, unbelievably brilliant. But, she's tough and, she was a regulator and she was in public accounting and she hunts and she fishes and she's somebody that knows. I mean, she'll come in a heartbeat and say, I think you're full of crap on that thing. And that's a bad idea. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening. Help me understand.
Tell me more, right?
But I tell you what, it has made us so much stronger and better as a team. It goes both ways, right? She knows that I'll walk in and say, I think you're full of crap on that one. Hey, let's talk about that. We do it in love, though. And again, it goes back to, Randy, what I said. If we didn't have that special bond and build that relationship, it's tough to have those kinds of conversations. Then it just comes off as being a bit authoritarian or dictatorial coming from me. I don't think you get the best ideas, right, if people are afraid to come into your office. So I feel very fortunate that that's not the case here. They can.
A big picture question. Is there something that you think credit unions need to do different or better to maintain relevance in this, ever-changing financial services landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's storytelling. I think that, during COVID, and when we say COVID, you and I aren't saying COVID. There were a lot of crap that happened last year. I can say crap on your podcast.
Absolutely can. You sure can.
That happened last year. And it's interesting. I'm in my 28th year now, which seems ridiculous. There's been a lot of time last year where I heard many of my friends, like longtime friends, make apologies. Oh, we need to serve the underserved, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And I'm listening to them and I'm like, we've been doing that for like 90 years, for goodness sakes. What are you talking about? Serve the under. That's what we're doing. We help people afford life. And I think that's storytelling. I think there are two things. I think that people in our industry, the 5,000 plus credit unions out there, need to remind themselves, hey, what our purpose is, right? It's helping people afford life. And we've helped people of modest means for our entire existence. And we're doing that every single day. I think we forget about that. I think we forget about the fact that every single day there's somebody in one of our call centers or in one of our branches who's sitting down and listening to a single mom with 2 kids try to figure out just how to pay her bills. And they're figuring that out. They're like sidling up beside her with empathy and listening and saying, I think we can do this. Let's figure this. And credit unions are doing that every single day. And I think we forget, we have to remind ourselves of our roots. And we have to not be apologetic, like, oh, it's a new idea. Let's help people, let's serve people of modest means. We're doing that every day. We just need to learn how to tell that story. We need to remind ourselves and tell the story over and over again. And for me, Randy, why would anybody go do business with anybody else? Why?
I've said for years, I didn't know if it was like the U.S. credit union system kind of like kicking off, or that Midwestern values where it's like we don't brag enough and tell the stories. So I'm not sure what it is. We're just like, so I couldn't agree with you more. I'd like to move on to your career journey. Most of us didn't grow up as kids going, yeah, someday I want to work in a credit union. So 2 questions. What'd you want to be when you were growing up? And when was that moment that you were like, credit unions, I can make a career out of this?
Well, there were 2 things that I wanted to do growing up. One, I wanted to play professional football.
Wait, who was the team?
Growing up, my team was the Pittsburgh Steelers and Miami Dolphins. If you're a kid growing up in the 70s, early 70s, it would have been the Dolphins, and mid 70s would have been the Steelers. I married a Wisconsin girl, so, for the past 29 years, it's been the Packers.
You've been a Packers fan.
But I wanted to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers when I grew up. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I also sang. And so, I wanted to be the lead singer for Earth, Wind & Fire for a bunch of years. Interestingly, that's what I did. That leads to the answer to the third question that you asked. I was doing that. I did it through college. I put myself through college doing shows. I was very fortunate. I got to see 40 countries around the world and make a living singing and dancing and acting. And in 1992, the end of 1992, I had gotten married and we had our first child. He'll be 29 here at the end of the year. And I was still doing shows, and I just had this epiphany that, hey, I have a child to take care of. I can't travel around the world, or at least I don't want to travel around the world anymore. And I was, funny enough, I was living in Miami and sitting in the studio with my band, and we were recording an album, and we were on a break, and I had this epiphany. I had traveled out of the country for about 6 weeks to do a show, got back, talking to the band on the break. And I said, hey guys, I'm sorry to say I'm out. I need to use my degree. I had a marketing and advertising degree from Eastern Kentucky University. And I said, I need to use my degree. And most importantly, I need insurance. And I kid you not, Randy, bass player sitting like this. He goes, "Hey man, my credit union's hiring."
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it was, at the time, it was Tropical Telco Federal Credit Union, which is now Tropical Financial Credit Union. CEO by the name of Greg Blount. And I applied for it. Was literally in the loan department, consumer loan department. And it was, I was an auto advisor, and I was the guy who sold extended warranties and credit life and credit disability. And I did that, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought it was a temporary job. The insurance was great. The pay was terrible. But I had some really good success. And one day, the CEO, Greg Blount, was looking at reports. I think we had 13 branches, and he was looking at these insurance reports. And I guess he asked somebody, he says, "Okay, so all the branches, 12 branches have insurance penetration of about 20 some odd percent, but I have this branch that's like 90 something percent. What's the deal?" And they said, "Oh, there's this guy. He was a song and dance guy. He's up there selling the insurance." He called me into the office and asked me, "How are you doing that?" And I'm like, "I'm just learning about the products and how it would fit and serve the member, and et cetera, et cetera." And he said, "Hey, I'm creating a new position. It's a business development position." They were moving from single sponsor AT&T of Bell South to multi-seg. And Eastern Financial was around at that time. They were the king of segs. And he said, "I want you to go toe to toe with them and go out there and sell the benefit of credit union membership to companies." And so it just started me on my trajectory in the industry.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. The bass player got you into credit union.
That's right.
Pretty awesome. Is there a line or a sentence that your team can finish? You know what I mean? Like, they've heard you say it so many times.
They'll all say the best is yet to come. That's something that, in fact, I'll get emails from team members. I'll send out and say, hey, hope you're having a great birthday and happy anniversary, et cetera. And invariably, the employee will send something back and say, "Hey, Todd, I appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. And, I love my job and I love what I'm doing. And as you always say, the best is yet to come." So
the best is yet to come.
Yeah, yeah.
I probably know what the title of this podcast will be. So, is there a myth about being a great leader that you would like to debunk, that if you never heard it again, it would be a happy day?
Myth about a great leader. Give me an example.
Let's see. How about you've mentioned something against this before, but that authoritative, that you have to be a strong personality, maybe that you have to be loud, or...
I think I know what you're saying now. I think that myth that you can't, it's like my friend saying, we can be friendly, but we can't be friends. I think that you can't show emotion and your true love for the people you're working with. I think that's definitely a myth. I think that's overrated. And I'm not saying that you have to come in and cry all the time every single day, but I think that really showing your passion and your love and your emotion for your team, it's overrated to say that you need to refrain from that. I think that's full of crap.
I want to go back to this because it's just bouncing around my head, but do you still sing? Is there going to be a reunion tour?
I do still sing. A bunch of years I would sing at church and like on our worship team and things like that. But I do. Right now I live vicariously. I have a daughter. I have 4 adult kids, and I have a daughter who is a professional singer. And so right now I'm just living vicariously through her.
Seeing what she does.
Maybe one day she'll have me on one of her albums. Who knows?
There you go. Bringing Dad on. You mentioned the 4 kids. You mentioned running earlier. What do you do outside of work to recharge? What is I know it's not work-life balance, but how about that integration of life?
Sure. Well, it's running, as I said. I just turned 56 this past month, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm around for a good long time for my kids. It's running. It's, I have 4 kids and 2 grandkids. We have a granddaughter who's 2 years and 3 months, and then coming up on 6-week-old grandson.
Jeez,
so it's spending time with the family, spending time with our grandkids really, really charges me up. I love sports still. I'm a big football guy. Love to go into football games and also concerts, outdoor concerts. I'm so looking forward to, even though I'm catching wind this morning that some of the venues are going to be requiring some restrictions. I just want to get back to life and get back to live music and live sports. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience podcast without a few rapid fire questions. So the questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. What was something that you said no to that now in hindsight, you're sure glad you did?
So I told you I was talking just a little bit earlier to James Shink from PenFed a little bit ago. And we were talking about this. There were some people who were at the beginning of COVID who were questioning why we would at Canvas not tap the brakes on everything and just sort of stop and just worry. To which I said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to keep the foot up the pedal. Our strategy's not going to change. Guys, we're going to get on the other side of this at one point. And shame on us if we don't continue to serve our members better and better every day. So no, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to pull the car off on the side of the road and sit and just wonder and wait to see when this thing's going to end. Let's go. Life goes on. So I don't know if that's the kind of answer you were looking for, Randy.
That was fantastic. We used that year also as just a growth year. I mean, it really was a chance to just do new stuff and try out new things but keep going forward, right? And I think I would say James did the same thing as well, right? Like he just kept the foot on the gas. So that's awesome.
Yeah, they certainly have.
Absolutely. Was there a recent purchase that you've made that you didn't know you needed, but now you're like, can't live without it?
So I wouldn't say recent. I would say within the past 2 years, I ended up buying a used John Deere tractor. I told you I had my zero turn, but I bought a tractor, like with a front end loader and like a box scraper and a brush hog. Dude, it's awesome. Yeah. I can plow snow. I can mow the fields. Who would have thought?
So wait, did you grow up on this land? Or is this no, this is all like new.
This is all brand new, man. This is all brand new.
I love it. That is great. So you mentioned singing. What were you like in high school? And did you get in any memorable trouble that you're willing to share?
I would say if you ever talk, my parents are still, I'm fortunate, they're still around and with us. But they would probably say I got into trouble when I was younger just because I was super, energetic, as you can imagine, and inquisitive, and I'm charging everywhere. And in high school, I was a good student. And I played football and ran track, and that was pretty successful, helped me get to college. I ended up running track in college, and I sang. So I was that really strange dude in high school who had, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I was friends with everybody. So I had friends who were in, music area, chorus, the football guys, and then all the kids who were experimenting back in that day. And then the band and everything. I was friends with everybody in our high school. We had a graduating class of about 250, 260 kids. I was friends with everybody.
That's pretty cool. So what are you reading right now? And what is that book that you either gifted or you think everybody should read?
I'm actually getting ready to read The Authoritarian Moment by Ben Shapiro. I've become for the past 2.5 years this political freaky goofball. And more podcasts, right? I've been listening to, the ebook podcast kind of stuff. But a friend gifted me The Authoritarian Moment by Ben Shapiro. I haven't cracked it open yet, but if anybody knows Ben Shapiro, I know exactly what I'm going to get. The book that I've been gifting Randy for probably 20 some odd years it's called Leadership Promises for Every Day by John Maxwell. You've probably heard of John Maxwell.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that particular, it's a devotional book. Interestingly, it's a faith-based devotional book. The application is for business leaders.
I think that's the first time that's been mentioned on the podcast in 3 years, basically. Yeah. So that's surprising.
I think I've gifted it now for 15 years to our leaders.
As soon as you held it up, I'm like, I think I know what book that is. The random question. What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Dude, that's, as a music guy, that's not a fair thing. If you were to say what genre, I could, it's a really tough thing because I'm a huge funk guy, a huge Tower of Power. I don't know if you know Tower of Power, but Tower of Power, Earth, Wind and Fire, Shaka Khan. And so I could give you groups, Foreigner, Journey, Queen, Styx. Those were all my rock. Kansas, Eagles. You know what? That's like asking me for my favorite child. I can't.
Yeah, you can't pick an album. There's a question that I didn't send in advance. Who's the first person that comes to mind when you hear the word success?
Oh, my dad.
How come?
So he's still with us. He spent 43 years in law enforcement. He was a policeman. My mom was a waitress. And, it was a very, talk about a poor blue collar kind of upbringing. But, he worked his tail off as a police officer starting in the early 70s, where they weren't making any money. And he was just a grinder. He was incredibly successful for all the good things in life in terms of, raising a family and providing for the family and giving examples of how you should work and how you should treat people. So I look at him and I'm like, I want to be like him when I grow up. He's incredibly successful in, his career, but also as a husband and as a dad. So yeah, he'd be the guy.
Dad does not get as many shout outs as mom on the show and things like that. So I always like when dad gets a shout out. So thanks, Todd, again for being on the show. The last question I have of you or for you is, do you have any asks or any final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, I would just say my ask would be what you and I talked about earlier, and that is to just lean into all the incredible things, the amazing things, the gifts that we have to give as credit union people. We're in this really unique space. I'm sure, those of us who've been around a long time feel very blessed that it has afforded us a lot in life. And I would say don't take that for granted. Just work really, really hard, serve people, make it about others and not self. Even if you have aspirations, that's cool. That's great. But if you make it about others and not self, and you just work really hard and raise your hand and say, hey, can I help? This is an incredible industry to be in. So work really hard, serve others, tell the story, rinse and repeat.
I love it. That is the perfect way to wrap up. Thank you again, Todd. If people have more questions of you, and I'm sure they will, besides subscribing to the podcast, I'm sure you're on all the podcast players in the room. But if they want to reach out to you, what's your poison? Email, Twitter, LinkedIn?
You can hit me on email. It's Todd at Canvas, CANVAS.org. I respond to email. I'm a geek. I respond to everything. At Todd Marksberry on Instagram. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I was on Twitter for a while and Facebook for a bunch of years. And last year, during all the craziness, I decided to jettison Twitter and Facebook I wanted to make sure I loved all my friends still.
Not a bad idea.
Too much crazy conversation going on.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. I hope you have a great day. And thanks for doing this. I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely, Randy. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. It's a true honor.
Before we go, I would just like to thank you for listening today. We greatly appreciate getting to do what we do because of all of you. And once again, a big thank you to Todd for being on the show and sharing his lessons learned over, his career with all of us. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, CUIs. As I mentioned to start the show, make sure to subscribe to their podcast over on CUmanagement.com. It is one of my favorites and one I don't miss often, that's for sure. A couple more things. While you're out there subscribing, make sure you're subscribing on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio to the CUInsight Experience. This podcast. Check out the CUInsight Experience podcast book list to find your next read from the guests on our show. That is it. Thank you all again for listening. Have a great day and be well, friends.